Okay, welcome back, everybody. We're waiting to jump live once again in the closing argument of the Kale Flyshower courtroom, waiting for the defense to begin. But right now, we want to talk about something that happened yesterday morning in the early morning hours out in Los Angeles. District Attorney Lacey, District Attorney Jackie Lacey, well, she, outside of her home, there was a bunch of Black Lives Matter protesters out there. Apparently, they were trying to schedule a meeting with her for quite some time to address some serious issues, specifically regarding her office's failure to address police-involved shootings. Now, this is something, I don't know if you've seen it, it's a video that went kind of viral. Jackie Lacey's husband opened the door with a gun and confronted the Black Lives Matter protesters. If you haven't seen this video, we're going to play it for you right now.
Right now, get off.
Good morning.
Get off of my
Are you gonna
porch.
shoot me?
I will shoot you. Get off of my porch.
Can you tell Jackie Lacey that we're here?
I don't care who you are. Get off of my porch.
We will get off your
right
porch.
now.
Can you tell
We're
her?
calling the police right
Good.
now.
Good. Wow. He pulled a gun and pointed it at my chest. We're here for the community meeting, Jackie Lacey.
Jackie Lacey
Maybe you'll shoot me in the back.
Jackie Lacey will go. Jackie Lacey will go.
Now, Emily, let's be clear. She was in the house? We think she was in the house?
She was in the house at the time.
What caused this? Like, how did this all start?
This was a long time in coming. So Jackie Lacey's office has overseen a number of police-involved incidents of violence, some of which have resulted in death, almost all of which have been against people of color. Black Lives Matter began protesting this years ago. For 2 years, this same group of activists has gathered every Wednesday in front of the DA's office in Los Angeles to protest what they see as Jackie Lacey's lack of response to official misconduct. What they see is an office that refuses to prosecute police officers or even enact something as simple as a do not call list, saying, you know what, we're going to step back from relying on those bad cops in our prosecutions and in our cases. So far, they've encountered a refusal to meet with them, a refusal to engage with them meaningfully, and so they started staging protests and prayer groups in front of Jackie Lacey's home. They'd been there before. This was not the first time they'd been to her home. But on this particular morning, the day before the election in which Jackie Lacey is fighting for her seat, 2 of the protesters went up onto the porch to ring the doorbell. And then you saw what happened next. Interestingly, the police arrived, the LAPD came to the scene. There were no trespassing arrests made.
So they weren't doing anything illegal?
They weren't doing anything illegal. The question of whether Jackie Lacey's husband did something illegal has now been put in the hands of the Attorney General. Obviously, it would be inappropriate for Jackie Lacey to prosecute her husband. But I think what makes that choice on her part to put this in the hands of the Attorney General particularly interesting is that's what Black Lives Matter has been asking her to do on police-involved shootings this whole time. They've been saying, you know what, Jackie Lacey, your prosecutors rely on these police to be their witnesses and their partners in investigation. Your office is too close. And your office is protecting the cops on whom you rely. You need to put this in the hands of the AG to do a proper investigation. Jackie Lacey's challengers, George Gascon and Rachel Rossi, both said that that is what they would do in the event of a police-involved incident of violence. They would put it in the hands of an outside prosecuting agency to make sure that the decision-making around whether to prosecute was clear. Jackie Lacey's refused to do so. And then
Why?
the day before the election, well, she has claimed that she is personally responsible for making the decision about whether to prosecute any given police officer. But at a certain point when she's chosen again and again and again not to prosecute any police officer, including in some really egregious incidents of violence, it starts to feel as though her office is prioritizing the protection of powerful state actors over the protection of the community. And I think that's really the heart of what's upsetting Black Lives Matter here, is that they are her community, they're her constituents. They're saying, you're elected to protect us, even against police brutality. So this was the long history of a community demanding better protection coming to a head.
What do we know about her husband? Do you know anything about her husband? And you talked about potentially a legal situation here. I mean, what could he be brought up or what could he be charged on? I mean, first let's start with what do we know about him and what could he be charged with?
I don't know a lot about him. I believe he has a law enforcement background. I don't know if he's currently working with the DA's office in any way. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. As the chief prosecutor's husband, I'm going to assume he has a license for that firearm.
Okay,
I think that's a pretty safe bet. But even so, you know, I used to be a public defender in California, and just looking at this incident, I see violations of Penal Law Section 422, making criminal threats. I see a violation of, man, it's been a long time. I'm going to remember these code
Let me ask you a
sections.
question. What happens if it's not loaded? What happens if he just brought it out as show?
If it's not loaded? It doesn't really matter, because under the criminal threat statute, the question of whether a threat is criminal is whether the person you're threatening is in reasonable fear. And he's pointing, first of all, with terrible trigger discipline, he is pointing a firearm at someone's chest and saying, "I will shoot you." I mean, that's a very clear-cut, plausible threat. In addition, there are brandishing statutes that criminalize the brandishing of a firearm, whether or not it's loaded.
What happens if you have a right to protect yourself in your home? I mean, here are these people, you don't know who these protesters are. They say they're protesters. He's just protecting his family. He's protecting his house.
Well, first of all, castle doctrine in California only applies if you're inside the home. So it does not apply to the front porch. Second of all, the argument that he didn't know who they are is a little thin because they've been there so regularly.
But he doesn't know what they're capable of.
True. I think that after 2 years of peaceful protests, the implication that the women who were on his porch would suddenly become a threat, as a lawyer, that's not an argument I'd want to have to make in front of a jury.
Do you think that charges would ultimately be brought against him? There's so many political considerations
So
here.
many political considerations.
But it's captured on tape. I mean, if you want, we're talking about trials where we don't have this kind of evidence. They have it right there.
They do have it right there. I'm not eager to see anyone be prosecuted, generally. I think that as a society, we respond with prison for too many things. However, in this instance, perhaps what happens next depends a little bit on what voters do today. If Jackie Lacey is the incumbent DA with over 50% of the primary vote first thing tomorrow morning, we may continue to see a world in which in LA there's no consequences for powerful actors.
I had asked you this during our break, and I want to bring it on kind of full circle because we are covering the Harvey Weinstein trial. We know that her office and her specifically have filed charges against Mr. Weinstein out in LA. It happened right as the first day of the trial here in New York. Do you think she did that for political consideration? She specifically went towards Harvey Weinstein as a way to maybe garner up votes?
So it's very difficult to know what's inside anyone's head. I do know that she was criticized by the prosecutors in New York for her timing. Basically, the argument is that the timing of her prosecution in Los Angeles undermined the ability to fairly pick a jury in New York because it further tainted the jury pool. Did she need to choose that moment to announce her prosecution? Absolutely not. It interestingly was a moment when she was facing heavy fire for this history of failing to prosecute powerful actors, including some folks who'd been donors of her campaign. And she'd also faced criticism for not addressing Me Too scandals within her own office well. There were complaints that people had received unfavorable assignments after making sexual harassment complaints within the office. Whether any of this factored in, who can tell? And also, you know, she hasn't responded in a detailed or engaged way to some of these complaints, so there hasn't really been a back and forth on it that would illuminate it for us.
20 seconds. I mean, we hear a lot of her detractors. Are there big supporters of her as well?
There are big supporters. I mean, like any incumbent DA, she has her supporters. I think what's interesting is that Los Angeles is having a watershed moment as it turns towards trying to find smarter solutions on crime.
What a story. I mean, pretty incredible to watch and pretty ironic. The DA's husband brandishing a gun and pointing it at protesters.
I would not have wanted to be upstairs when he came back upstairs.
I don't know what that fight would look like if there was a fight. But I do know one thing. Emily, you've been terrific. Thanks so much for coming on and breaking down these cases with me. I'll be signing off, but you're in great hands. Angelica Spanos is up next, and we are waiting for the closing argument by the defense. Stay tuned.